A sonnet is a lyric poem that is 14 lines long. So if you have a 14-line poem, it is a sonnet. A haiku is a Japanese poem written in 3 lines using 5-7-5 syllables, and it's usually about nature. The soaring seagulls, 5, against a summer blue sky, 7, gliding on the breeze, 5. So a haiku is 3 lines using 5-7-5. So let's see if we can apply some of our terms now to these 2 stanzas. This is The Raven by Edgar Allan Poe, and let's take a look at it. First, we can find examples of internal rhymes, rhymes that are in the same line. See if you can find one. How about the first line? We have dreary and weary. That's an example of an internal rhyme. There's another in line 3. Napping and tapping is an example of an internal rhyme. How about external rhymes? We have lore and door and more. Line 2, 4, 5, and 6. Those are all examples of external rhymes. What about alliteration, repetition of consonant sounds repeated at the beginning of words? How about line 3? Nodded, nearly, napping. The repetition of that N sound. That would be alliteration. What about an example of onomatopoeia? We have tapping, rapping. I believe that's it. What would be the rhyme scheme of stanza 1? We have weary, that would get an A. Lore would get a B. Tapping would get a C. Door would get a B. Door again would get a B. And then more would get a B. So the rhyme scheme of stanza 1 is A, B, C, B, B, B. How about the syllable meter? Let's see if we can figure it out for line 1. Once upon a midnight dreary, while I pondered weak and weary. So I got 8 and 8, so that is 16 syllables. So that is the syllable meter of line 1, which the foot meter would be half. So the foot meter would be 8. Another type of poem is a tercet. Tercets are any 3 lines of poetry, whether as a stanza or as a poem, rhymed or unrhymed, metered or unmetered. A haiku would be an example of a tercet. A common tercet would be an enclosed tercet that has a rhyme scheme of A, B, A. A quatrain are any 4-line stanzas of any kind, rhymed, metered, or otherwise. So any 4 lines together would be a quatrain. The last slide is this poem, and I would like us to see if we can tell what type of poem it is. First, if you were to count the lines, you would see there are 14 lines. That would mean it's a sonnet. Now, if we were to do the rhyme scheme, let's see how we do it. Minds would get an A, love would get a B, finds would get an A, and then remove would get a B. This is another type of rhyme which we didn't talk about called a sight rhyme. A sight rhyme is a rhyme that looks like it would be a rhyme. So we have OVE in love and then OVE in remove. So those two on sight look like they rhyme, even though they do not sound like a rhyme. They would still get a rhyme. Then we have mark, that doesn't rhyme with love or minds, that would get a C. Shaken would get a D. Bark would get a C. Taken would get a D. Cheeks would get an E. Come would get an F, Weeks would get an E, and as you can see, there's a pattern going on. Doom, again, would get an F, and then these last two proved on their own their sight rhymes, so they would both get a G. Now, this is a typical rhyme scheme of a sonnet. A, B, A, B, C, D, C, D, E, F, E, F, G, G. Now, these two lines together at the bottom would be a couplet because they're two lines that rhyme together. This concludes the Poetry PowerPoint. I hope you found the information helpful. Thank you.